What's up everyone, this is GC Kinsey, and to celebrate Pride, I'm going to be talking about all of my different flags and what they mean. Happy Pride Month, y'all! As of the time I'm filming this, it is Pride Month 2021, and another year of Inside with Pride, thanks again to this lovely pandemic. If you live in an area where you are lucky enough that you can actually celebrate Pride in person with people again this year, that is awesome, good for you, and I am so jealous. For those of us who are still in areas where the situation's not so great and we need to still take precautions, then I invite you to use the hashtag InsideWithPride on Instagram again this year. If you post anything to that hashtag, I will be sharing it to my stories, so I hope to celebrate with you online. I wanted to do a fun video for Pride, so I'm going to be using my collection of flags to talk about all the different aspects of my queer identity. And the reason I'm doing this is because, one, being queer is complex. Just like human beings are complex, so are our identities. Queerness can take many different forms, even within the same person, and I don't think that's something we acknowledge quite enough. People tend to want to simplify things and sort of boil them down to their lowest common denominator because that's easy to understand. But I prefer the approach of embracing our complexity rather than shying away from it. So I want to show just how many different ways my queer identity can be described. Which brings me to point number 2. Labels are important. There's a whole lot of debate about labels, whether they do more harm or good, whether they spread knowledge or create confusion, whether they enhance social power or cause social division, whether they give us a framework or put us in a box. But the way I see labels is just as a tool that you can use as little or as much as you want to understand yourself and share that understanding with others. So if labels help you, great. If they don't and you'd rather just ditch them, great. What matters is recognizing the place labels have in self-reflection and communication, and respecting people's use of them, whether or not you use them yourself. I could make a whole other video just about labels, so if that's something you'd like to see, let me know. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and start looking at these flags. I have two sort of different categories of flags, one's for my orientation and one's for my gender. So we're gonna start with orientation. And first up is Demiromantic. This one is for my romantic orientation, and it means that I am only capable of being romantically attracted to someone that I have a deep emotional connection or bond with. It's an orientation in the gray part of the aromantic spectrum, and for me personally, it tends to manifest like being aromantic most of the time, except for those rare occasions when I catch a case of the feels. Just to give you an idea of how infrequently this happens, I've only been romantically attracted to 15 people in my entire life, and I've only had romantic relationships with 2 of those people. It usually takes a while for my romantic attraction to someone to form. Anywhere from a few months, even all the way up to 2 years in one case. And that's been happening less and less often as I've gotten older. Probably because once you're no longer in school, you're not meeting as many new people, and therefore not forming as many new emotional connections. The longest I've ever gone between instances of romantic attraction is 6 whole years, and as of right now, I've been in what I call one of my aromantic periods for going on 3 years now. I'd love to see that continue. I prefer these aromantic periods to the times when I do have romantic feelings, and I prefer being single to being in a relationship. I'm not against the idea of a relationship if those feelings are there and we're compatible, and as infrequently as those feelings happen, I almost feel guilty not to try to explore it when they do. But just considering how much I would rather be aromantic all the time and how much I do enjoy being single, a relationship would have to be really, really compelling for me to even go there. I also want to mention that I do experience something called Altruist attraction a little bit more often than I experience romantic attraction. And for me, romantic attraction usually starts off that way. In case you're unfamiliar, Altruist attraction is like if you think of romantic and platonic attraction as a binary, Altruist would be non-binary. So it might be attraction that's kind of hard to define as either romantic or platonic, or maybe it kind of sits somewhere between those types of attraction, or maybe it just doesn't fit within that framework at all. I usually experience it as attraction that could go either way. It has the potential to be either romantic or platonic, and I need more time and further exploration to determine which one it is. I often end up saying to myself, okay, I know I like this person, but do I like them that way? And I'm not really able to answer that without spending more time together. Demiromantic as well as demisexual are orientations that are often misunderstood and misconstrued, and I have another video all about that if you'd like to check it out. Okay, next pride flag is asexual. This one is for my sexual orientation, and it just means I don't experience sexual attraction to other people. That's it. There's a lot of other stuff people think asexual means, which I have talked about in one of my other videos, but it doesn't really have all of this baggage that people attach to it. Asexuality is just a spectrum of people who experience little to no sexual attraction, plain and simple. One thing that surprises people about me sometimes is that I don't hate sex or think it's gross or shy away from it in conversation. I actually find it quite interesting as a concept and as a subject of art and literature, and a lot of my humor tends to be full of sex jokes. And people can sometimes have trouble reconciling that with the fact that I'm ace. But that just goes to show what a limited understanding there is in our society about asexuality, and how easily aces get lumped in with this kind of prudish, anti-sex stereotype. I didn't realize that I was ace until I was a little bit older, mid to late 20s, and I came to that realization because of one of those romantic relationships I talked about before. I got 2 years in, I had really strong romantic feelings for this person, I wanted us to be together forever, but the sex angle was just not what it is for most people in long-term relationships. Even after all that time together, I still didn't have that sexual attraction like I did with romantic attraction, and I had a lot of reservations about actually having sex. And in the end, that was a big part of why our relationship failed. We just weren't sexually compatible. And that kind of got me thinking, okay, why am I like this? What is the deal with this? What's going on? And as my self-reflection led to exploration and research, I discovered the asexual community. And I was pretty surprised how much their experiences resonated with mine. Before this, I had heard about asexuality, but my understanding was very limited. For example, I didn't even know that you could be asexual and still have romantic feelings. So it never even crossed my mind that I might be asexual when I first heard the word. And even when I did finally start questioning, the first conclusion I thought I reached was that I was actually demisexual. The whole demi experience I just described previously was something I heavily related to. That was kind of what led to that light bulb moment of, oh, there's a word for that. But then once I learned about the split attraction model and the way that some people define their sexual and romantic orientations as two different things, then I was like, oh no, demiromantic, asexual, that's much better. I think one of the most important points I want to emphasize here is this. We have a flag. We are part of the queer community. Because as some of you fellow aces out there may already know, there are constantly people trying to tell us that we're not. There's been an ongoing so-called discourse about this in online queer spaces for years now. People claiming that aces shouldn't be included in the community or celebrated at Pride because we can pass as straight, because we don't have the same support needs as everybody else, because we're not oppressed like real queer people. A lot of this debate is just recycled biphobia in a different package, and it's all completely bogus. But it's constantly out there in front of aces who may be questioning or exploring or just trying to figure out who they are. So I just want to tell you, if you are ace, you do count, you do belong, and you are queer enough. And that covers orientation, so now let's move on to gender. I have quite a few more flags for this one because, as you'll see, my gender is pretty complicated. So I'm going to be starting out with the broadest umbrella terms and then drilling further and further down to more specific ones. And first up we have transgender. This one means I'm a different gender than the one I was assigned at birth. I was assigned female at birth, but my actual gender is non-binary. More details on that in a bit. I tend to hear a lot of people talk about trans and non-binary as sort of two very separate things, like you're either one or the other. And that always amuses me a little bit because I am both, and for me, both of those things are very much intertwined. So if I'm coming out to someone or explaining my gender to them, I describe it as non-binary trans because both of those terms are very important to me. Not every non-binary person feels the way I do. Some consider themselves trans, some don't. But I just think it's important to remember that we do all have a place in the trans community if we want to be there. Just like how there's a discourse about asexuals not counting as queer, there is a similar discourse about non-binary people not counting as trans. But again, that's simply not true. We meet the definition of transgender, and we absolutely count if we want to be counted. Also, fun fact, did you know that this stripe right here, the white stripe on the trans pride flag, represents non-binary people? And also people who are in the process of transitioning or questioning or exploring, and also even solidarity with intersex people. The blue represents trans men, the pink represents trans women, and the white represents all the rest of us who don't fit into that binary framework. So not only is the definition of trans inclusive of non-binary people, so is the flag. I also see another idea getting perpetuated that you're not really trans if you're not undergoing some sort of physical medical transition. And I also just wanted to address how false and how harmful that claim is. Transitioning isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. There's no right or wrong way to do it. And medical transition is expensive, has lots of barriers to access, has risks associated with it just like any other medical procedures or care, so it's not for everyone. Not everyone wants surgeries or hormones or needs them to affirm their gender. And not everyone who does want them is able to get them. So medical transition isn't an accurate way to measure whether someone is trans. If you are a different gender than the one you were assigned at birth, then you're trans, full stop. Next flag is non-binary. This one means that my gender doesn't strictly fit within the binary categories of man or woman. And like I mentioned before, this does meet the definition of trans because people are not assigned non-binary at birth. So therefore, non-binary is considered part of the trans umbrella. We are represented by that white stripe on the trans flag, but we have our own flag as well. And I think that's important. Because one, not every non-binary person considers themselves to be trans or uses the trans label. And two, it can be beneficial to have kind of more specific communities that can find each other and bond over their shared experiences. Just like with those on the aromantic and asexual spectrums, non-binary is another one of those very much misunderstood segments of the queer community. And hey, guess what? I've got another video all about that on the way. A lot of people try to exclude us. A lot of people don't understand us. A lot of people don't even think we're real. I remember one time I was standing in a signing line at a Comic-Con and chatting with the people around me, and we all had pride gear on, so we were just kind of talking about our various identities. And this one person said, "There's just one identity I don't understand and can't wrap my head around, non-binary." And I said, "Well, today is your lucky day." That kind of thing is actually super common when we're raised in a heavily binary-centric society. People just struggle with the whole idea that we exist, and as a result, they often think that we are confused or deluded or just seeking attention. Even within trans circles, there can be kind of this aversion to non-binary people because we're making the real trans people look bad. We're making cis people take the trans community less seriously. We're doing trans wrong. Because we are so widely misunderstood, we tend to get left out of conversations or forgotten or gatekept from important resources. We need more people to be aware that we exist and understand us so that we can be respected and treated as equal members of society. So that's why I think it really matters for us to have a non-binary specific community, to have a non-binary flag that represents us and helps bring us together, and just makes it easier for us to find each other at Pride. Alright, next flag is gender fluid. This one means that rather than having a single steady fixed gender, I have a gender that shifts and fluctuates. And this is considered a subset of the non-binary umbrella. So just like non-binary is the type of trans that I am, gender fluid is the type of non-binary that I am. See how we're drilling on down? First of all, I have to say that I am so happy a pride flag for this exists. Because as I'm sure you might guess, the more you kind of drill down to a specific identity, the smaller those subgroups become, so the harder it is to find other people like you in the wild, so to speak. So every time I see someone else with that flag at Pride, it fills me with such a sense of joy because it lets me know that there is another real, live, flesh and blood person in front of me who is also gender fluid. It's even led to some really cool conversations and friendships. I haven't figured out why this is, but it seems like gender fluid people catch some of the most flack among the entire non-binary community. For example, if you're a freshly cracked egg who's questioning your gender for the first time, and you do a search for gender fluid online, you might encounter some fun things like Reddit posts saying, "I hate gender fluid people," or "Gender fluid isn't real, change my mind." YouTube videos entitled "Gender Fluid Cringe," which are just compilations of videos of gender fluid people trying to present us in the worst light possible and make fun of us. Social media posts and comments, never read the comments, talking about how non-binary is okay, I guess, but gender fluid is just a step too far. It's like people can learn to be okay with trans and non-binary people whose gender stays in one place, but a fluctuating gender just breaks their brains or something. One thing I notice that happens a lot is people conflate gender fluidity with having a fluid gender expression. Like if you style yourself in an androgynous way, or if your style kind of moves around between masculine and feminine and androgynous, a lot of people will assume that means you're gender fluid. And that might be the case for some people who are using their style to show their gender fluidity to the outside world. But gender expression isn't the same thing as gender identity, and it's just as likely that a gender fluid person might dress consistently the same way all the time, even though their gender changes, or that a person whose style is fluid doesn't actually have a fluid gender. Another thing people often misunderstand is that gender fluid isn't just bouncing back and forth between man and woman. Are there gender fluid people who are men sometimes and women other times? Yeah, sure, of course. But that's not the only way you can be gender fluid. Some people's gender fluctuates in ways that can't be connected to manhood or womanhood at all. Some people's gender fluctuates in wider or narrower ranges. For me personally, if you had a scale going from masculine on one end to feminine on the other, my gender would fluctuate anywhere between kind of the middle of that scale to the masculine end. And by the way, we don't get to pick what our gender does. We don't decide that today is a man day, for example, and then be a man. Our gender fluctuations happen outside of our control. Sometimes they might be influenced by our environment, sometimes they might be influenced by our internal emotions, sometimes they might be just random. It really depends from person to person. But they're not a choice. That would be too good to be true. So now that we've covered gender fluidity, for my last two flags, I want to talk about the two kind of main gender states that I tend to fluctuate between. Starting with transmasculine. This one means that I am trans in a way that is more masculine than my female assigned gender at birth. Transmasculine can include binary trans men, as well as any AFAB non-binary people who feel that masculinity is part of their gender in some way. So when I talked about how my gender fluctuates in that sort of more masculine half of a spectrum of masculinity and femininity, that's what I mean by transmasculine. And the gender euphoria I get from being transmasculine informs quite a few areas of my transition, including using he/him pronouns and the honorific sir, wearing facial hair sometimes, taking advantage of the fact that I can sing in the tenor range, wishing I could speak that low too, and planning to take testosterone so that hopefully one day I can. What I really like about this particular label is it gives me a way to explain that I am masculine of center without being a binary man. I also like that it puts masculine people, whether that's trans men or non-binary folks, in community with each other so we can share our experiences and our goals and our tips and advice and all sorts of other things we may have in common. And it also gives us a chance to see how different we are and how many ways there are to be masculine. I think that's especially important considering how deeply toxic masculinity and patriarchy are embedded in our society. The beautiful variety that we have in the transmasculine community shows that there's not just this one sort of narrow, toxic, unhealthy way to be masculine. And I think that's something a lot of cisgender men can learn from. I have one more flag to show you, and that represents sort of the other part of the gender spectrum I tend to fluctuate toward, and that is genderqueer. This one means a lot of different things to different people, but it all boils down to the fact that you find your gender to be queer in some way. Some people use it interchangeably with non-binary and define it the same way, that your gender doesn't fit into those man or woman boxes. Some people use it to describe the way they fall outside gender norms, whether that is their gender identity, their gender expression, or both. Some people almost use it like a verb, like literally queering gender and fighting against the systems that try to oppress and limit gender. So there can be kind of a political angle to it. Some people use it to describe the relationship between their gender and their orientation if they feel like there's kind of a queer connection there. It's really wide open and it encompasses a lot of different experiences. For me, genderqueer is a perfect way to explain that combination, I feel, of sort of the more masculine part of my gender and the other part that's a little bit more kind of feminine and non-binary and sparkly and fabulous. It's the part of the gender spectrum I described that's closer to the middle. Something about the word genderqueer really hits home with me because it feels very genderful, which is how I feel. I feel like I'm just bursting with gender all the time. I don't feel a neutral sense of gender or a lack of gender. What I feel is more like a big gender party where people are throwing glitter and confetti everywhere. And I'm definitely one of those people who likes to queer up gender norms, so I resonate with that aspect of the word genderqueer as well. I call my personal aesthetic glamdrogynous, and I've always been really drawn to people who break the rules of gender expression, so to speak, including the rules of androgyny. I really like it when people get creative about how they combine masculine and feminine elements in their style, and I try to do the same. One of my favorite ways to go about that is facial hair with glitter lipstick. Just like with transmasculine, genderqueer resonates with my gender euphoria, and I think that's really important because so often trans people can kind of get stuck looking at everything through the lens of their dysphoria. But as someone who experiences both gender dysphoria and euphoria, I try to lean into my euphoria as hard as I can. I really try to celebrate the joy that comes from being affirmed in my trans identity. And there you have it, all of my different pride flags. I hope that all helped you understand just how complex being queer can be and how many layers there can be to people's identities and how those layers can interact with each other in different ways. And if you ever worry that you're too complicated or too much or have too many labels, please, please don't. I promise you are not the only one. So whether you're celebrating in person or online this year, let your pride flags fly. I hope you make lots of great connections with your fellow queer people and with your support systems. I hope you are respected and affirmed for who you are. And I hope you have a fantastic Pride Month. Do you have a collection of pride flags like I do? Or maybe do you just have one or two? Are there certain flags that you especially enjoy bringing to and seeing at Pride events? Are you an ally to the community who is just learning about this stuff and has questions? I would love to hear from all of you, so please comment and let's get a discussion going about how we're all celebrating Pride this year. If you'd like to celebrate with me on Instagram, my handle is GCKinsey, just like it is across all other social media platforms, and I will be using the hashtag InsideWithPride all month long. I'll be making lots of Pride-themed posts as well as sharing other posts from those of you who use that hashtag, so please feel free to connect with me and get involved. And while you're here, if you'd like to check out some of my other videos, I have more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person, as well as makeup tutorials and cosplay music videos. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a happy Pride, and I will see you on the next one.